The $5,000 Ferragamo Oxford hit Lily's ribs before she even saw it coming. She crashed into the Tiffany display case, crystal ornaments shattering around her as she hit the marble floor, her coat tearing, her elbow splitting open against the glass edge. For a moment, the entire Saks Fifth Avenue went silent. Christmas carols still played softly overhead, but no one moved, no one breathed. Lily looked up from the floor, blood trickling down her pale arm, at the man standing over her with contempt twisting his handsome features. Derek Sullivan, her ex-fiancé, the man who had stolen everything from her 4 years ago. He snarled at her to stay down where she belonged, calling her a worthless parasite. He had no idea who she was anymore. No idea that the broken girl he remembered, the one who had begged him not to leave, who had bled on a subway bathroom floor losing their baby alone, who had tried to walk into highway traffic because she wanted to die, who had survived winter on the streets of New York with only $5 and a torn jacket, was gone. No idea that she had risen from those ashes. No idea about the 10-carat diamond ring hidden under her leather glove, the penthouse on top of the tallest building in Manhattan she had left that morning, or the Black American Express card in her Hermes purse that had no spending limit. And Derek definitely had no idea about the man whose name was now legally attached to hers. The man whose security team was currently pinning him against the jewelry counter. The man whose phone was buzzing in her purse right now. Lorenzo Marchetti, her husband, the most dangerous mafia boss in New York, head of the Marchetti crime family that controlled everything from Wall Street to the dark corners of Brooklyn. As Lily's trembling fingers accepted the call and Lorenzo's voice, cold as the winter wind outside, asked who had touched her, she watched realization start to creep across Derek's face. The color drained from his cheeks. His blue eyes went wide. He had just kicked the wrong woman. And in approximately 10 minutes, when Lorenzo's motorcade of black SUVs screeched into this building's private garage, when 30 armed men in designer suits flooded this floor, when the most feared name in the New York underworld stood face to face with the man who had once beaten his wife until she miscarried, Derek Sullivan was going to learn a lesson about consequences that would destroy his entire world, his career, his reputation, his freedom, and very nearly his life. But he still did not know it yet. Right now, in this moment, with his expensive shoe still hovering over her like she was trash beneath his feet, he still thought she was nothing. He still thought she was the same desperate girl he had thrown away like garbage 4 winters ago. That was about to change. Before we delve deeper into this satisfying tale of love, revenge, and redemption, please help me by liking this video, sharing it with someone who loves great revenge stories, and subscribing to the channel so you don't miss what happens to Derek next. Now, let's embark on this fulfilling journey, where Karma appears in a 3-piece Armani suit. 6 hours earlier, just as the first winter sunlight touched the skyscrapers of Manhattan, Lily Carter was standing in a dressing room as large as the studio apartment she had once dreamed of renting. Rows of clothes hung in perfect order like soldiers in a luxurious army. Chanel beside Dior, Valentino paired with Gucci, each piece worth as much as an entire year of her former rent. Yet Lily's hands reached for the simplest cream-colored knit dress, the most modest item in the entire vast collection. She gently smoothed the soft fabric, feeling its warmth spread beneath her slender fingers. Even after 2 years of living in luxury, she had never grown used to it, and perhaps never would. The habits formed in hardship had sunk deep into her bones, like invisible scars no one could see but her. She still remembered counting every coin to buy a loaf of bread. She still remembered curling up in the corner of a shelter, because there was nowhere else to go. She still remembered the smell of desperation and hunger. Those memories never truly disappeared. They only settled at the bottom of her soul and surfaced again at the most unexpected moments. As she was fastening the buttons, a warm, deep voice came from the doorway. Lorenzo Marchetti stood there, leaning against the oak frame, his Italian ink dark eyes watching her with a mixture of tenderness and helplessness. He was already dressed in a charcoal Tom Ford 3-piece suit with a perfectly tied silk tie, his black hair slicked back neatly to reveal the small scar on his left eyebrow. He looked as if he had stepped out of the cover of a GQ magazine, if such a magazine had a section for dangerously charming mafia bosses. He said she was doing it again. Lily turned and her green eyes met his gaze through the mirror. She asked what she was doing. Lorenzo walked into the room, each step radiating power and absolute confidence. He said she always chose the cheapest things in the wardrobe, that the dress was probably the least expensive here, and he wanted to know why the wife of Lorenzo Marchetti dressed as if she were saving every penny. Lily smiled, the gentle smile only he could draw from her, and said she liked simple things. Lorenzo came up behind her and his strong arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her into his solid chest. His warm breath brushed her ear as he whispered that she was the wife of one of the richest men in New York, that she could buy anything she wanted, anything in the world, and yet she still shopped in her own closet, as if she were living on a tight budget. Lily tilted her head against his shoulder and said money did not change who she was, that she was still Lily, still the girl he had found in that hospital years ago. Lorenzo kissed her neck where her pulse was beating a little faster than usual, and whispered that that was exactly why he loved her. But he still wanted her to have everything she deserved, and he wanted to give her the whole world if she would let him. Lily turned in his arms and placed her palm over his chest, where his heart beat steadily beneath the expensive fabric. She said he had already given her more than the world, because he had given her a home, a family, and a reason to keep living. Lorenzo's eyes softened. The ice he always wore before others melted completely when he looked at her. He said she had given him the same, because before he met her he had only existed. He had not lived. They stood there for a while in the dressing room filled with morning light, two people who had found each other in the darkness, two broken pieces joined into one whole. Lily could not know that in only a few hours the past she thought she had buried would return, bringing old pain and a new lesson. But in that moment, in Lorenzo's arms, she felt safe, she felt loved, and she did not know these would be the last peaceful moments before the storm. Lorenzo released her, but his hands remained on her shoulders as if he could not bear to lose the connection entirely. He asked where she planned to go today. Lily said she would go to Saks Fifth Avenue to do Christmas shopping, that she wanted to find a few gifts for everyone, and maybe something special for him. Lorenzo raised an eyebrow, the scar on his left brow lifting with it. He said she did not need to buy anything for him, that he already had everything he needed, and that all he needed was her. Lily lightly punched his chest and called him sweet talker. But the smile on Lorenzo's lips faded when he continued, his voice more serious. He said she would go with Nico and Dante. Lily sighed. She had known where this conversation was going. She said she was only going shopping, that she did not need bodyguards following her like she was the president. Lorenzo took her chin, gently but firmly, making her look into his eyes. He said she knew who he was. She knew what he did. She knew how many enemies the Marchetti family had. Every day there were people who wanted him dead, and the easiest way to hurt him was to hurt her. He would not gamble with her safety, never, and this was not a matter for negotiation. Lily looked into those dark eyes and saw the fear Lorenzo Marchetti never showed anyone else. The most powerful mafia boss in New York, the man the entire underworld feared, was afraid of losing her. She understood that. She understood because she carried the same fear. The fear that one day someone would knock on the door and tell her he was not coming home. So she softened her voice. She asked if 2 men were really necessary. Lorenzo answered at once that he wanted to send 10, but he knew she would hate that, so 2 was a compromise, the lowest limit he could accept. Lily knew that when Lorenzo used that tone, nothing could change his decision. This was Lorenzo Marchetti, head of the family, speaking, not Lorenzo, her husband, who would indulge her to the core. So she nodded. She said all right, she would go with Nico and Dante. The tension on Lorenzo's shoulders melted away at once. He bent down and kissed her forehead, his lips warm and gentle. He whispered thank you for understanding him. Lily looked up and placed a light kiss on his lips. She said she understood, she would always understand, but he also had to promise her that he would be careful, that he would come home to her tonight. Lorenzo smiled, that dangerous smile whose tender side only she was allowed to see. He said he promised. He would be home at 7. They had a reservation at 8. Lily asked which restaurant. Lorenzo only winked and said it was a surprise. But he wanted her to wear the red dress, the one he could not stop thinking about taking off her. Lily's cheeks burned even after 2 years together. She called him incorrigible. Lorenzo laughed softly, his voice low and full of promise when he said he would never grow tired of her. Not in this life, not in any other. He kissed her again, this time deeper, longer, as if he wanted to carve the feeling into his memory. Then he released her and walked toward the door. He stopped, turned back, and looked at her one last time. He said that if there was anything at all, anything that made her uncomfortable, she was to call him immediately. Lily nodded and promised she would call. Lorenzo looked at her for another second, as if engraving her image into his mind. Then he turned and walked out of the room. His footsteps echoed on the marble floor. Then the private elevator doors closed. Then silence. Lily stood alone in the dressing room, looking at the rows of luxury clothes around her. She could not explain the strange feeling rising in her chest, as if something were about to happen, as if dark clouds were gathering before a storm. But she brushed the feeling away. It was only baseless worry, she told herself. Today would be a normal day. She would go shopping, come home, put on the red dress, and go to dinner with her husband. Everything would be fine. But Lily Carter did not know that she was wrong. She was completely wrong. 2 hours later, the sleek black Maybach stopped in front of Saks Fifth Avenue on Fifth Avenue. Nico opened the door for Lily, his eyes quickly scanning the busy sidewalk before he nodded to signal that it was safe. Dante was already standing on the other side, the 2 men in black suits forming an invisible barrier around her. Lily stepped out, and the December cold struck her face like a light slap. Snow was falling softly, white flakes spinning in the air before melting when they touched the warm pavement. She pulled her cashmere coat tighter around herself and walked inside. Saks Fifth Avenue at Christmas was a palace of luxury and splendor. Golden lights wrapped around the towering columns, and thousands of crystal stars hung from the ceiling like an artificial night sky. A massive Christmas tree stood at the center of the first floor, at least 30 feet tall, decorated with silver and gold ornaments, and red ribbons that curved like rivers of fire. Christmas music drifted softly from hidden speakers, a warm, low voice singing of silent nights and winter wishes. The scent of fresh pine mixed with expensive perfume and the smell of hot chocolate from the nearby cafe. This was the Christmas of the wealthy, of those who never had to worry about where the next rent payment or meal would come from. Lily was still not entirely used to belonging to this world. She walked past the perfume counters, past the handbag and shoe displays, where each item cost as much as her entire former life. Nico and Dante followed at a respectful distance, close enough to protect her, but far enough that she did not feel imprisoned. Lorenzo had trained them carefully in this, in how to make Lily feel protected without feeling suffocated. She stopped at the Tiffany counter, where diamonds sparkled under the lights like frozen tears. She was looking for a gift for Lorenzo, even though she knew that man could buy anything he wanted. But Lily wanted to give him something from her heart, something that showed she had thought about him, that she had taken time to choose for him. Her eyes settled on a white gold pocket watch, a classic design with delicate lines. The inside lid could be engraved. She already knew what she would engrave. Il mio cuore, my heart. It was what she called him in return for the way he always called her his heart. She signaled the sales associate and completed the purchase. The gift was placed in a deep blue velvet box and tied with a silver ribbon. Lily smiled as she held the small bag in her hand. She could imagine Lorenzo's face when he opened it, the way his dark eyes would soften as they always did when he looked at her. She continued wandering through the store, buying a few small things for Marco, for Nico and Dante, for the people who had become her family over the past 2 years. This was the first Christmas when she truly had money to buy gifts for others. The first Christmas when she did not have to stand outside the glass and look in at things she could never touch. She was leaving the jewelry counter, shopping bags dangling from her hands, when she saw him. Her heart stopped. The world around her seemed to freeze. Standing at the Louis Vuitton counter less than 50 feet away, laughing with a blonde woman, was the ghost from the past she thought she had buried forever. Derek Sullivan, the man who had destroyed her, the man who had taken everything from her, the man who had killed the child in her womb with his blows and his cruelty. He was here, right in front of her, as if hell itself had opened its gates and sent the devil back to torment her one more time. The shopping bags almost slipped from Lily's hands. Her feet felt as if they had been nailed to the polished marble floor, unable to move, unable to run. 4 years. 4 years she had tried to bury that face in the deepest part of her memory. 4 years she had rebuilt herself from the ashes. 4 years she had told herself he no longer had any power over her. But it took only one glance, only the sight of that blonde hair, that charming smile, the way he stood with the confidence of someone who believed the world owed him something, and all the walls she had worked so hard to build collapsed like sand. The memories flooded back like a tide she could not stop, could not control. She remembered the first time she met Derek, when she was only in her early 20s, having just lost her parents in a terrible car accident, living with an aunt who treated her like a servant. He appeared like a savior, handsome, polished, speaking the sweet words she longed to hear. He said he would take care of her, that he would love her, that he would give her a new family. And she, naive and desperate, believed every word. She remembered the first time he hit her, a slap that came out of nowhere because she had come home a little late, how he apologized afterward, cried, knelt, swore he would never do it again, and how she forgave him. Then came the second time, the third, the 10th, until she lost count. The punches, the kicks, the times he dragged her across the floor by her hair, the nights she curled up in the corner of the bathroom, trying not to cry out because her tears only made him angrier. The mornings when she looked in the mirror and did not recognize the swollen, bruised face staring back at her. She remembered the day she found out she was pregnant, how for one brief moment she had hope, thinking maybe the baby would change everything, maybe Derek would change, maybe they would become a real family. But when she told him, he did not rejoice. He exploded, accused her of trying to trap him, to bind him to her. And then he struck her belly, the first time and not the last. She remembered that night, the coldest January night New York had seen in years, when he discovered she had tried to call the police, even though she had hung up before saying anything, how he dragged her out of bed in the middle of the night and threw her outside in nothing but thin sleepwear, tossed her wallet after her with its few dollars and a small photo of her parents, and locked the door behind her. The air was bitterly cold, snow falling thick and fast, her bare feet on frozen ground, her body shaking so hard her teeth would not stop chattering as she knocked, begged, pleaded to be let back in, and no one answered. She wandered the streets all night, looking for any place to hide, sat in a subway station until security chased her away, stood in the shadow of a convenience store until the manager looked at her with disgust and told her to leave, until finally she found a shelter, where she lay on a dirty bed among strangers, her hands wrapped around her growing belly, tears streaming down her cold cheeks. She remembered the day she lost the baby, weeks later, when she was surviving on donated meals and overcrowded nights in the shelter, when the pain began in the middle of the night, so fierce she could barely move, when she crawled into a filthy public restroom and there, alone, with no one beside her, no one holding her hand, she lost her child, blood soaking through the only jeans she owned as she lay on the cold floor, clutching her stomach and crying without sound. A child who never even had the chance to feel life, taken by hunger, by cold, by fear, by the blows Derek had rained on her body. And after all that, she remembered the morning she stood on a sidewalk watching cars rush past, thinking about stepping forward, just one step, and ending everything. No more pain, no more shame, no more memories that tore at her every night. When someone pulled her back, shouted, called for help, and she woke up in a hospital room, white and empty, with no one to visit her, no one who cared whether she lived or died, until Lorenzo Marchetti walked into her life. Lily blinked and returned to the present. She was standing in Saks Fifth Avenue, years later, no longer the girl with a few dollars in her pocket trembling on the streets of New York, but Lily Marchetti, the wife of the most powerful Mafia boss in the city, a woman who could buy this entire store if she wanted. And yet her heart was still racing, as if she were that frightened girl, her hands still shaking as if he still had power over her. Then Derek turned. His blue eyes met her green ones, and everything was about to change. For a moment, Lily hoped he would not recognize her. 4 years had passed, and she had changed so much. She was no longer thin and pale like she had been then, no longer with hollow eyes from sleeplessness and hunger, no longer carrying the worn look of a woman crushed by life. But that hope shattered the instant she saw recognition flash in Derek's eyes. His blue eyes widened for a second, then narrowed with something that was part surprise and part amusement. He said something to the blonde woman beside him and began walking toward Lily. Each of his steps felt like a knife driving into her chest. Every instinct in Lily screamed at her to run, to turn away, to leave immediately. But her feet would not obey. She stood there, frozen like a statue, watching the ghost from her past approach with the smile she had once loved and now found revolting to the bone. Nico and Dante noticed the change in her body language. From the corner of her eye, Lily saw them moving closer, but she gave a slight shake of her head. Not yet. She did not want a scene. She did not want Derek to see that she was still afraid of him. Derek stopped a few steps away, his gaze sweeping over her from head to toe in open appraisal. He was still handsome, perhaps even more so, in his gray suit and with a Rolex gleaming on his wrist. But Lily knew that beauty was only the shell hiding the monster inside, the monster she had lived with through 3 years of hell. He spoke in that falsely sweet voice she remembered too well. He said, "Well, look who this is, Lily Carter." He never thought he would see her here. He had assumed she was still digging through trash somewhere for food. Lily swallowed and tried to keep her voice steady. She said she had nothing to say to him. She turned to leave, but Derek stepped in her way. He gave a mocking smile and said, "Why the rush? Old friends meet and you cannot even chat for a moment." Then he looked at her more closely, at the expensive cashmere coat, the Hermes bag, the shopping bags from luxury brands. Something dark flickered in his eyes. He said, he understood now. It seemed she had found some fool to cling to. That was her only talent after all, pretending to be pitiful to use other people. Heat rushed to Lily's face, but she forced it down. She said he knew nothing about her life. Derek threw his head back and laughed, the sound echoing through the quiet store and drawing glances from others around them. He said he knew enough. He knew what kind of woman she was, a parasite who lived off men, that without him she was nothing, and it seemed she had found a new host now. He stepped closer, his voice dropping low but clear. He asked who the idiot was, whether he was rich, whether he knew she was the trash Derek had thrown out into the street. Lily's hands shook. She hated herself for it, hated that after 4 years he still had the power to make her tremble. She gripped the handle of her Hermes bag until her knuckles turned white. She told him straight to his face that he was the one who had taken everything from her, that he had beaten her, that he had thrown her into the street in the middle of winter, that he had no right to stand here and speak to her as if he were the victim. Derek lifted an eyebrow, pretending to be surprised. He said beaten her. He had only been disciplining her. She always liked to exaggerate, always liked to play the victim so people would pity her. Then he tilted his head and looked at her with mockery. He said, but he had to admit she looked a little better. At least now she did not look like a starving ghost anymore. Her new fool must be feeding her well. Lily felt sick. She wanted to scream, to slap him, to let the whole world see the monster beneath that handsome mask. But she did nothing. She only stood there with trembling hands, forcing herself not to cry, forcing herself not to let him see how weak he still made her feel. 4 years ago she had begged him. 4 years ago she had knelt and cried and pleaded with him not to abandon her. She would never let him see that version of her again. Never. Then the blonde woman appeared at Derek's side, her red nails digging possessively into his arm, and everything was about to become much worse. The blonde woman looked Lily up and down as if she were inspecting a cheap item in a discount store. She was tall and thin, with lips swollen from filler and a straight nose that was clearly the result of surgery. She wore a Chanel dress and glittering diamond jewelry, but none of that luxury could hide the ugliness and the contemptuous look she gave Lily. She asked Derek if this was the crazy ex he always talked about, the one who chased him obsessively and would not let go. Lily felt as if she had been slapped. The crazy ex. Chased him. Would not let go. So Derek had told this woman about her, but he had twisted the story, turned Lily into the pursuer and himself into the victim. She should have been surprised, but she was not. This was exactly what a narcissist like Derek would do. Derek laughed and put an arm possessively around the woman's waist. He said that was right, Victoria. This was Lily, the one who had clung to him like a leech, who had cried and begged for a month when he threw her out. Truly pathetic. Victoria giggled, her shrill laugh like nails scraping glass. She said how pitiful. Women with no self-respect were so sad. Lily clenched her fists until her nails bit into her palms. She could feel Nico and Dante moving closer, tension radiating from them like static, but she signaled them to stop. Not yet. She did not need them yet. She looked straight into Derek's eyes, her voice shaking but clear. She asked if he had told her that Lily had chased him. Had he told her that he beat her, that he threw her into the street on the coldest night of the year, that he took every bit of her inheritance? Derek stiffened for a second, then recovered quickly. He sneered and said, "See, Victoria, she always made up stories like that. She loved to play the victim so people would pity her. That was how she survived." Victoria nodded, looking at Lily with disgust. She said she hated women like that most. Women with no self-respect who only lived off men and then accused them when they were abandoned. Lily felt as if she were drowning. No one believed her. No one ever believed her. Even when she told the truth, people chose to believe Derek's lies. Because he was handsome. Because he was charming. Because he knew how to manipulate people. Then something inside her broke. Maybe it was the patience she had forced herself to keep. Maybe it was the pain she had held back for 4 years. Maybe it was the memory of that night in the subway restroom. She spoke again, and this time her voice did not tremble. She asked if he had told Victoria about the child, if he had said she was pregnant when he threw her out, if he had said she lost that child alone in a public restroom because of hunger and cold. The air seemed to thicken. Victoria looked at Derek, for the first time something other than contempt in her eyes. "What child?" she asked. Derek did not answer. His face went from pale to red, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning. It was the look Lily knew too well, the look before every beating, the look of the monster when it showed its true face. Lily went on, her voice now steady as steel. She said she had been lying on the cold restroom floor, blood everywhere, losing her child, while he slept in the warm apartment she had paid for. She asked if he ever thought about that, if he ever spent a single second thinking about the baby he had killed. Derek exploded. He lunged toward her, eyes blazing, voice snarling through his teeth. He told her to shut up, told her to shut her mouth, that he had not killed anyone, that if she had been pregnant, it was not his child, that she was a liar, always a liar. Then he raised his hand, and Lily knew what was coming. Her body remembered, even if her mind had tried to forget. Her body knew how that raised hand would come down, how much it would hurt, but this time was different. This time she was not alone. This time she was Lily Marchetti. The shove came before Lily could even react. Derek's palm slamming into her chest with the force of 4 years of stored hatred and sending her staggering backward, her high heel slipping on the polished marble floor as she realized she was about to fall. But she did not expect the kick. The Ferragamo Oxford on Derek's foot, a $5,000 shoe he had surely bought with some woman's money. Crashing into her ribs as she lost her balance, pain exploding in Lily's chest like a bomb as she heard glass shatter and someone scream. Maybe her. Maybe the people around them. Then her back hit the Tiffany display, and crystal Christmas ornaments rained down around her as she collapsed onto the floor. And for a moment the world was nothing but white pain. Lily lying there with her cheek against the icy stone, trying to breathe while every breath felt like a knife in her ribs, warm blood running down her arm where her elbow had been cut by broken glass. The cashmere coat Lorenzo loved to see her in now torn open, and Derek standing over her looking down with undisguised contempt, growling that she should stay where she belonged. Then everything happened at once, as Nico stormed in like a hurricane, the 29-year-old bodyguard, Lorenzo's cousin, the man who had sworn to protect Lily with his life, grabbing Derek by the collar and ripping him away with a roar. Derek unable to react before he was slammed face down onto a nearby counter, his arm twisted painfully behind his back, his face pressed to the glass beneath the diamonds, Nico pinning him with one hand while pulling the gun from under his jacket with the other and pressing it to the back of Derek's neck, his voice ice cold as he warned that if Derek moved even an inch, he would put a bullet through his head right there. Derek groaning and struggling until Nico forced him down harder and made him cry out in pain. While a few steps away, Dante already had his phone in hand, hitting the speed dial and speaking urgently as soon as the call connected, telling his boss that someone had attacked the lady of the house, that she was hurt, that they were at Saks Fifth Avenue on the first floor. Chaos erupting around them with customers screaming and scattering, staff frozen in shock, mall security rushing in and stopping short at the sight of Nico's gun, Victoria standing a few steps away with a face white as paper and her mouth open in silent horror as she watched the man she loved kick a woman to the ground and then watched him crushed under a gun like an insect. Lily trying to sit up with pain, stealing her breath, a clerk rushing toward her only for Dante to reach her first, lifting her gently with one arm while still holding the phone in the other, asking if she was all right, if she could stand, Lily nodding, though her body shook uncontrollably, then feeling her own phone vibrate in her pocket, Lorenzo calling, and as she looked at Derek pinned helplessly under Nico's hand, she knew hell was about to fall on that man in just 10 minutes. Lily's hands were shaking so badly she could barely get the phone out of her Hermes bag. The screen lit up with Lorenzo's name and the small heart icon she had added beside it. She swallowed and tried to steady her voice before answering. But the moment she touched the button, before she could even say hello, Lorenzo's voice came through. Who? Just that one word. A single word, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. His voice was so cold Lily could feel the frost through the phone. This was not Lorenzo, her husband. This was Lorenzo Marchetti, the Mafia boss. The man who had built his empire on the bones of those who dared to cross him. Lily opened her mouth to speak, but instead a sob tore out of her throat. 4 years of holding back, 4 years of burying the pain, 4 years of telling herself she was stronger. All of it shattered in that moment. Tears poured out uncontrollably, and she cried. Cried like the abandoned child she once was. Cried like the woman who had lost everything she once was. Cried for the pain in her ribs, for the fear that still lived in her after 4 years, for the humiliation of being kicked to the ground in front of hundreds of strangers. Lily. Lorenzo's voice changed instantly. The cold was still there, but beneath it was something else, something darker and more dangerous, like the growl of a wild animal when its mate is threatened. He said her name again, his voice now a strange blend of tenderness for her and fury for the one who had made her cry. He asked if she was hurt, who had touched her. Tell him the name. Lily forced the words out through her sobs. She said Derek Sullivan. He was here. He had found her. He had kicked her. Silence on the line. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. That silence was more frightening than any shout. Lily could hear Lorenzo's breathing, slow and steady, like a snake coiling before it strikes. Then he asked, his voice now completely without emotion, flat as a frozen lake, and it was that flatness that terrified Lily most. He asked if that was the man who had beaten her, the one who had thrown her into the street, the one who had made her lose the child. Lily whispered yes. A quiet exhale on the other end. When Lorenzo spoke again, his voice had changed completely. It was no longer cold. It was lethal. The voice of a man who had made a decision, and that decision would determine someone's fate. He told her he would be there in 10 minutes. Told her not to go anywhere. not to let Derek out of Nico's sight. He was coming, and he would handle this. Then he paused and added, his voice softening for only a brief moment. He told her to listen to him. Il mio cuore. He would never let anyone hurt her again. Never. That Derek would pay for what he had done to her. Every crime, he promised her. Lily sobbed that she loved him. Lorenzo said he loved her too, and then he hung up. Lily lowered the phone and looked at Derek pinned under Nico's grip. His face was flushed with rage and humiliation, his mouth still spewing threats and curses, saying he would sue them, call the police, put them all in prison. He did not know. He still did not know whom he had angered. He did not know that in about 10 minutes the most powerful man in New York's underworld would be standing in front of him. He did not know that the little empire he had built by deceiving women was about to collapse. He did not know that for 4 years Lorenzo had listened to Lily cry in her nightmares, had watched the scars on her body and soul, had sworn that if he ever met the man who caused them, that man would wish he had never been born. And now that day had come. The clock began to count down. 10 minutes. 10 minutes. 600 seconds. That was the short span of time Derek Sullivan still had left to exist as a free man, even though he did not yet know it. The first minute passed in chaos. Derek was still shouting, still threatening, declaring that he was the lover of Senator Hayes' daughter and that they would all regret touching him. Nico said nothing, only pressed Derek's face harder against the glass display every time he tried to struggle. Mall security had arrived, but they stood several yards away, not daring to come closer when they saw the gun in Nico's hand. One of them was on the phone, probably calling the police, but strangely the call did not seem to be going through. In the second minute, things began to change. The main doors of Saks Fifth Avenue suddenly slammed shut, then the side doors, then the emergency exits. A store employee ran to the elevators and found they were no longer working. The escalators stopped mid-motion. The sound system came on with a polite female voice announcing that the mall was temporarily closed for security reasons and asking customers to remain calm. But no one was calm. Shoppers began to panic, pounding on doors, shouting. No one understood what was happening. No one except Lily. She knew this was Lorenzo's power reaching out, like invisible fingers tightening around the building. In the third and fourth minutes, they began to appear, from hidden corners, from doors Lily had never known existed. One by one, then in small groups. Men in black suits, faces cold and unreadable, moving with military precision. They carried no visible weapons, but anyone who looked at them knew they were dangerous. They took control of every entrance, every strategic corner, every vantage point, overlooking the entire first floor. Within 2 minutes, at least 20 of them had appeared, and the number was still growing. Derek stopped shouting. For the first time, he sensed that something was wrong. He twisted his head as far as Nico allowed, and his eyes widened when he saw the men in black suits surrounding them. He demanded to know what this was, who they were, why there were so many of them. No one answered him. In the 5th minute, Victoria tried to call her father. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely dial. She was the daughter of a senator, used to being protected, used to being indulged, unaccustomed to this kind of fear. But the call did not connect. She tried again, and again, and again. But her phone only showed no signal. She looked around like a trapped animal, and then tried to run for the exit. A man in a black suit stepped in front of her, said nothing, only shook his head. Victoria backed away, her face drained of color. In the 6th and 7th minutes, whispers began to spread. Lily heard them around her. Marchetti. Someone said the name. Then someone else. Then another. The name spread like fire through dry grass. Marchetti. The Marchetti family. The Marchetti Mafia. And when the name reached Derek's ears, he froze. Lily saw the moment it hit him. The moment realization washed over his face like cold water. His eyes went wide, his lips trembled, and all the color drained from his handsome face. He knew that name. Everyone in New York knew that name. Marchetti was the Mafia family that controlled half the city, the name people only dared whisper in the dark. The criminal empire even the federal authorities approached with caution. And Lorenzo Marchetti, its head, was the youngest and most ruthless boss in its history. Derek began to shake. He was no longer shouting, no longer threatening. His voice was weak and trembling when he asked Nico what Marchetti was, why they were involved with Marchetti, that she was just a crazy homeless woman. She could not possibly be connected to Marchetti. Nico gave a short, cold laugh, the first time he had spoken since restraining Derek. He said that crazy homeless woman was Lily Marchetti, the wife of Lorenzo Marchetti, and you just kicked the boss's wife. Derek gagged. The 8th and 9th minutes passed in deadly silence. No one spoke. No one moved. The entire first floor of Saks Fifth Avenue seemed frozen in time, all of it waiting for the inevitable. Derek stopped trying to escape. He lay still under Nico's hand, his body shaking uncontrollably, his eyes staring into nothing as if he were already seeing his own death. Victoria had sunk down onto the floor, knees pulled to her chest, crying silently. Then the 10th minute arrived. The roar of engines thundered from the underground garage. Not one car, not two, at least 5, their engines blending into a single growl like thunder announcing an approaching storm. A private elevator door, one Lily had never known existed, slid open. And Lorenzo Marchetti stepped out. Hell had arrived. Lorenzo Marchetti stepped out of the elevator like a king entering his own domain. No, not like a king. He was the king, and everyone in the building knew it. He stood 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, his frame carved from marble and steel, every step radiating absolute authority. The black 3-piece Armani suit fit his powerful body perfectly. The dark red silk tie the color of dried blood, his Oxford shoes polished to a mirror shine. His black hair was slicked back, revealing his high forehead and the small scar cutting through his left eyebrow, a mark from a gang war 15 years earlier when he was only 19 and had to kill for the first time to survive. But it was not the scar that frightened people. It was his eyes. Eyes as black as an abyss, like 2 cosmic voids swallowing all light, bottomless, without mercy. Those eyes had seen death, caused death, ordered death more times than anyone could count. And now they burned with a rage the people around him could feel like heat from a steel furnace. Behind him, more than 30 men emerged from elevators and side doors, all in black suits, all armed beneath their jackets, all with faces cold as stone. They moved like a perfectly trained unit, taking positions with flawless precision. At their head was Marco Benedetti, Lorenzo's right hand, a 45-year-old man with salt and pepper hair and hawk-like eyes. Marco had followed Lorenzo since he was a fatherless teenager, had helped him build the empire from nothing, had buried their enemies beneath layers of concrete across the city. And now Marco was looking at Derek the way one looked at an insect about to be crushed. The reaction around them was immediate. The remaining customers on the floor backed away, pressing themselves against the walls as if trying to become invisible. Store employees lowered their heads, afraid to meet Lorenzo's gaze, some of them even dropping to their knees without realizing it. Mall security had completely vanished, likely warned in advance to stay away. Even those who did not know who Lorenzo was could feel the danger radiating from him like static. This was a predator at the top of the food chain, and human survival instinct told them to keep their distance. Victoria, still sitting on the floor, began to sob when she saw Lorenzo. She recognized him. Of course she did. Her father was a senator. She had been warned about men like Lorenzo Marchetti, men even powerful politicians did not dare touch. She tried to crawl away, her nails scraping on the marble floor. But there was nowhere to run. Lorenzo did not look at her. He did not even look at Derek. Those dark eyes were searching for only one person. And when he saw Lily, when he saw her standing there with dried blood on her arm and tears on her cheeks, when he saw the torn coat and the way she was holding her aching ribs, something strange happened. All the cruelty, all the coldness, all the unshakable facade of the Mafia boss vanished in an instant. Lorenzo's face changed, and for that brief moment, he was only a man looking at the woman he loved in pain. Hurt flashed through those dark eyes, then tenderness, then worry, then guilt for not having protected her. He walked toward Lily faster now, and when he reached her, he dropped to one knee in front of her like a knight before his queen. His rough hand, the hand that had choked men and pulled triggers countless times, gently lifted her chin. He whispered, asking if she was in pain. Il mio cuore, let him see her injuries. Who did this to her? Who dared touch her? His voice trembled, and that was something none of his men had ever witnessed. Lorenzo Marchetti never trembled. Lorenzo Marchetti never showed weakness, but before Lily he was not a boss. He was only a husband in pain because his wife was hurt. Lily cried, her tears falling onto his hand. She said her ribs hurt, her elbow was bleeding, but she was all right. She would be all right now that he was here. Lorenzo carefully lifted her sleeve and looked at the deep cut on her elbow. His jaw clenched until the muscles stood out on his neck. Then he looked at where she was holding herself, knowing bruises were forming beneath the fabric on her ribs. His eyes closed for 1 second, and when they opened, the tenderness was gone. In its place was hell. He stood up slowly, every movement radiating threat. Then he turned to look at Derek, and the temperature in the building seemed to drop below freezing. Derek shrank under that gaze. He had once thought himself powerful when he beat Lily. He had once thought he held control. But now, under the eyes of Lorenzo Marchetti. He realized he had never known what real power was, and he was about to learn. In the most painful way possible, Lorenzo signaled to Marco, and the salt and pepper-haired man stepped forward at once, Lorenzo speaking to him in Italian, his voice still gentle but carrying an authority that could not be questioned, telling him to call Dr. Chen immediately and have her here within 15 minutes, no matter where she was or what she was doing. Marco nodding and stepping back with the phone already to his ear, Lorenzo turning back to Lily and gently brushing her cheek, wiping away the drying tears on her skin, whispering to ask if she hurt anywhere else because he needed to know everything. Lily shaking her head and saying only her ribs and her elbow, that she was all right, truly all right, but Lorenzo did not believe her because he knew her too well, knew how she always tried to be strong and minimize her pain so he would not worry. Him taking off his jacket and carefully draping it over her shoulders, wrapping her in his warmth and familiar scent, her cashmere coat torn and blood-stained, and Lorenzo, knowing he would burn it after today, along with every memory of what had happened here, him lifting her arm again and looking at the cut, his mouth tightening into a thin line because it was deep and would need stitches and would leave a scar, another scar on his wife's body, another one he had failed to prevent, and he hated himself for that. He had promised to protect her, and sworn no one would ever touch her again, and yet he had failed, him bending to kiss her forehead and whispering that he was sorry he had not been there and should have been there. Lily gripping his hand and telling him it was not his fault and never to think that he was here now and that was what mattered. Lorenzo closing his eyes for a moment and resting his forehead against hers as they stood there briefly. Two souls pressed together while the world disappeared. Then Lily whispering shakily if he knew who the man was. Lorenzo opening his eyes and saying he did because Dante had told him on the way. Derek Sullivan, the man from Lily's nightmares, the one he had hired investigators to find for 2 years who had vanished from the earth, the one he had sworn to make regret ever being born, and now he was lying there less than 10 steps away, trembling like a cornered dog, fate having placed him before Lorenzo on a silver platter, Lorenzo straightening slowly, brushing Lily's hair one last time before turning away, and in the moment his back turned to her, everything about him changed. His relaxed shoulders hardening like steel, his gentle movements becoming heavy and threatening, his face turning into a mask without emotion, colder than the winter outside. But most frightening were his eyes that had looked at Lily with all the tenderness in the world, now empty black voids with no warmth left. This was the Lorenzo Marchetti the underworld feared. The boss who had built an empire on the bones of his enemies. The man who had once buried a traitor alive and forced him to listen to the dirt fall on his coffin. Him walking toward Derek with each step echoing on the marble like a war drum. Nico releasing Derek at Lorenzo's nod and letting him collapse onto the floor. Derek trying to crawl up but his legs failing so that he could only kneel there shaking, looking up at Lorenzo standing before him like death made flesh. Lorenzo saying nothing at first, only looking down at Derek the way one looked at an insect. The silence stretching heavy and suffocating. Derek opening his mouth to speak but Lorenzo raising a finger and he fell silent as if his throat had been crushed. And then Lorenzo speaking at last, his voice low and even, and without emotion like a death sentence being read aloud, saying, "So you are Derek Sullivan." Lorenzo turned to look at Lily, and for one brief moment the tenderness returned to those dark eyes, and he asked her, his voice softer now but still edged with steel, to tell him everything the man had done to her. Lily swallowing because she had told Lorenzo about Derek before, in the late nights when nightmares woke her, and he held her until she slept again, but she had never told him in detail, never told him all of it, because she had been afraid of what he would do if he knew the full truth. And now, standing there with Derek kneeling at her husband's feet, she knew it was time. She took a deep breath, the pain in her ribs reminding her of all the other pain he had caused, and she began to speak. She told him about the first time Derek hit her, a slap because she had come home 15 minutes late. She told him about the second time, the third time, the 10th time, until she lost count. She told him about the nights curled up in the corner of the bathroom, about the mornings when she hid bruises under thick makeup, about the feeling that she was no longer human but only a punching bag for his anger. And Lorenzo stood motionless, but Lily could see his jaw tightening a fraction with every word. She went on and told him how Derek had tricked her into signing papers she did not understand and used them to steal her entire inheritance, the money her parents had left her to start a new life. She told him how he controlled everything, her money, her friends, where she was allowed to go and who she was allowed to speak to, how she became a prisoner inside her own relationship with no money, no one to turn to, no way out. A muscle twitched in Lorenzo's cheek and his hands clenched into fists, his knuckles turning white. She told him about the day she found out she was pregnant, how her voice trembled as she spoke of the naive hope that the baby would change everything, and how that hope shattered when Derek punched her in the stomach the first time. She told him about the times after that, how every time he was angry her belly became the target, as if he wanted to kill the child even more than he wanted to hurt her. Lorenzo closed his eyes and a breath escaped his chest. Not a breath of calm, but the breath of a man struggling to keep rage from exploding. She told him about that night, the coldest January night in New York's history. How Derek found out she had called the police and threw her into the street with nothing but her sleepwear and $5 in her wallet. She told him about the weeks in the shelter, the hunger gnawing at her stomach, the cold cutting through her bones, the night she lost the baby alone in a subway restroom. She told him about the morning she stood on the sidewalk watching cars rush past and thought that one step would end everything. And when she finished, silence fell. Lorenzo did not open his eyes, did not move, did not speak. He only stood there like a statue, while the air around him thickened with restrained fury. Derek was crying, kneeling on the floor with tears and mucus streaming down his face, stammering meaningless apologies. Victoria had fainted at some point and lay sprawled on the floor unnoticed. Then Lorenzo opened his eyes and stepped back to Lily, took her hand and lifted it to his lips and kissed it lightly. His voice when he spoke was so soft only they could hear it. He asked her what she wanted him to do with Derek, said she only had to say the word, and the man would vanish from the earth as if he had never existed. No one would find the body. No one would know what happened. He would do anything she wanted, anything, because she was everything to him, and anyone who hurt her deserved to die. Lily looked into her husband's eyes and saw the vast love and the violent fury burning together inside them. She knew he meant every word, and she knew that if she nodded, Derek would die tonight and no one would ever find him. But she also knew she did not want to turn Lorenzo into a killer for her sake, and did not want to carry the weight of a man's death on her conscience for the rest of her life. She wanted Derek to pay, but not that way. She said she did not want Lorenzo to kill him. Then she looked at Derek, her gaze colder than it had ever been since they met again, and said she wanted him to live and face what he had done, and to lose everything the way he had made her lose everything. And Lorenzo nodded slowly, a cold smile appearing on his lips that made Derek whimper in fear. And he said, "All right, il mio cuore, as you wish." Lorenzo turned to Marco, and when he spoke, his voice was cold and clear, like ice cracking. He ordered Marco to begin immediately, to call their people in the banks, and freeze every account in the name of Derek Sullivan. Not only in the United States, but across the world. Every account, every investment, every single dollar the man owned. All of it to disappear within 1 hour. Marco nodded, phone already to his ear, his deep voice rapid as he began reciting numbers and codes. Derek heard it, and his eyes went wide with horror. He tried to stand, but his legs were like water. He could only remain kneeling and scream that they could not do this, that it was his money, that they had no right. Lorenzo did not even look at him. He continued giving orders to Marco, his tone as calm as if he were reading a grocery list. He said to call Harrison at Wellington Investments and inform him that Derek Sullivan no longer worked there, not starting tomorrow but starting now, that he was terminated for ethical violations, and to make sure he would never be hired by any financial firm on Wall Street again. Derek whimpered. That job was everything he had, his livelihood, his access to wealthy women he could deceive. Without it, he was nothing. He began to cry, pitiful sobs breaking from his throat, tears and mucus running together down his once handsome face, now twisted with fear. He begged Lorenzo to stop, said he was sorry, that he knew he was wrong, that he would do anything to make it right. But Lorenzo still did not look at him. He went on, his voice still like ice. He ordered Marco to send all evidence of Derek's financial fraud to the FBI, including the documents he had tricked Lily into signing 4 years earlier, and to inform them that he had stolen inheritances from at least 3 other women by similar methods, to make sure the file was complete enough that the FBI would issue a warrant within 48 hours. Derek screamed. He had lost all dignity. He crawled toward Lorenzo, reaching out as if to grab the hem of the boss's trousers, begging him not to do this, saying that if the FBI came, he would go to prison and rot there. Nico stepped forward and kicked Derek's hand away, preventing him from touching Lorenzo. Victoria had woken at some point. She sat on the floor, her face pale as paper, staring at the scene in disbelief. She looked at Derek, the man she loved, the man she thought she would marry, now kneeling and crying like a child. She looked at Lorenzo, the most feared Mafia boss in New York, destroying Derek's life piece by piece without laying a hand on him. And she looked at Lily, the woman she had just called crazy and obsessive and shameless, now standing there with dried blood on her arm and the calm face of someone who had already won. Then Lorenzo mentioned her. He ordered Marco to call Senator Hayes and inform him that his future son-in-law was a con artist and a woman abuser, to send him photographs of Lily's injuries from today and the medical records from 4 years earlier that their people had recovered, and to make sure he understood what kind of man his daughter was seeing. Victoria sprang to her feet, her face flushing from white to red. She screamed what? Her father. They could not do that. They had no right to involve her father. Then she turned on Derek, her eyes blazing, and demanded if it was true, if what they said was true, if he had really beaten Lily, if he had really stolen her money, if he had really caused her to lose her child. Derek opened his mouth, trying to say something, trying to spin another lie as he had done all his life, but Lorenzo cut him off. He told Victoria, his voice still cold but now carrying something almost like pity, that it was all true, that Derek had beaten his wife for 3 years until she miscarried, then thrown her into the street in winter to freeze, and that if Victoria stayed with him, he would one day do the same to her. Victoria looked at Derek. Derek looked at Victoria, and in his eyes she saw the truth, not because he confessed but because he did not deny it, because in that moment his mask had fallen completely and she saw the monster underneath. Victoria said nothing. She simply turned and walked toward the exit that Lorenzo's men had opened for her. She walked fast, then ran, her heels striking the marble floor like the frantic beat of a heart. Derek called after her, screamed her name, begged her to stop, but she did not turn back. The door slammed shut behind her, and Derek knew he had lost her. Lost the senator's daughter, lost the ticket into high society he had spent a year cultivating. He had lost everything. His accounts frozen, his job gone, the FBI on the way, his lover fleeing. All of it in 10 minutes. Lorenzo looked down at Derek, and for the first time a smile touched his lips. But it was not a smile of joy. It was the smile of death looking at prey that had already been completely broken. He told Derek he was not finished yet, that there was one more thing he had to do before Lorenzo would let him go. Lorenzo signaled to Nico, and the bodyguard immediately grabbed Derek by the collar and dragged him across the marble floor toward Lily. Derek no longer having the strength to resist, his body limp like a puppet with its strings cut, his face soaked with tears and mucus, the blue eyes that had once charmed so many women now red and swollen, Nico throwing him down at Lily's feet so that he fell flat on the floor with his forehead striking the cold stone in a dull, painful sound. Lorenzo stepping to Lily's side and placing one hand on her back in a gesture of protection and possession, looking down at Derek and ordering him in a voice like ice to kneel up straight, to lift his back, to look into his wife's eyes and apologize to her. Derek trying to kneel but his legs shaking so violently that he fell twice before he could finally hold the position. Lifting his head to look at Lily, and for the first time in 4 years their positions completely reversed. 4 years ago Lily had knelt at his feet begging him not to abandon her. Now he was the one kneeling and she was the one standing above him. Lorenzo speaking again, his voice cracking through the air like a whip as he ordered Derek to apologize for the first time he slapped her. Derek swallowing, his voice hoarse and trembling as he said he was sorry for slapping her. Next, Lorenzo said, "Apologize for every time after that, every punch, every kick, every time you dragged her across the floor by her hair." Derek sobbing openly now, tears streaming as he apologized for all the times he had hit her, saying he was not human, that he was sorry. Lorenzo, not stopping, apologize for her inheritance, the money her parents left her, the money you stole with your filthy tricks. Derek dropping his head, his shoulders shaking as he apologized for taking her money, saying he was a thief and he knew it and he was sorry. Lorenzo stepping closer, his voice lowering and becoming even more terrifying. Apologize for the child, the air seeming to freeze, Lily feeling her heart catch in her chest, because this was the deepest wound, the one she was not sure would ever heal. Lorenzo continuing, each word like a bullet aimed at Derek, telling him to apologize for punching her stomach when he knew she was pregnant, to apologize for killing her child, the child she never even got to hold in her arms. Derek collapsing forward with his forehead to the floor, his crying now a raw wail as he begged forgiveness for the baby, calling himself a monster, saying he knew he was a monster, apologizing again and again. Lorenzo still not finished, ordering him to apologize for that January night when he threw her into the street with only $5 and her sleepwear, the night he left her to almost freeze to death on the streets of New York. Derek no longer able to form coherent words, only stammering apologies over and over like a broken machine. "And apologize," Lorenzo said, his voice now trembling with restrained fury. "Apologize for making her want to die. Apologize for making her stand on a sidewalk and think about stepping into traffic because of you. Apologize for almost taking the woman I love before I ever had the chance to meet her. Derek lying at Lily's feet, his body shaking with uncontrollable sobs, completely broken, no longer the confident, handsome man who had kicked her to the floor 15 minutes earlier, but only a miserable heap crying beneath the woman he had once tortured. Lily looking down at him and waiting for the satisfaction she thought she would feel, seeing the man who had destroyed her reduced like this. But it did not come. Instead, she felt only emptiness and exhaustion. This was the man who had once made her want to die, who had killed her child, stolen her youth, left scars on her body and soul that might never fully heal. And now he was kneeling at her feet, crying like a punished child. She had once been so afraid of him she could barely breathe. Now seeing him like this, she felt only that he was pitiful. She turned to Lorenzo and took his hand and said it was enough, and that she wanted to go home. Lorenzo looking at her and his dark eyes softening as he nodded, then turning back to Derek one last time and saying there was one more thing. Lorenzo stood over Derek, his shadow falling across him like the shadow of death over a condemned man. And when he spoke, his voice was not loud, but it carried through the suffocating silence, each word like a hammer driving nails into a coffin. He said, "You have 24 hours to leave the United States. Not 36, not 48, but 24. Starting now." And he paused to let the weight of every word sink into Derek's mind. Then he went on and said that if after 24 hours Derek was still on American soil, his people would find him. And this time, he would not ask his wife what she wanted done. He would decide himself, and Derek would wish he had never been born. Lorenzo bent closer, lowering his voice so only Derek could hear, and added that if Derek thought he could hide somewhere Lorenzo could not reach, he was mistaken. That he had people on every continent, in every major city, in every dark corner Derek could imagine. That if he ran, Lorenzo would find him. And when he did, he would send Derek's bones back to his mother in Christmas boxes. Then Lorenzo straightened and brushed his hands together as if he had touched something filthy, and ordered Nico to release him. Nico stepped back and Derek lay on the floor, unmoving, as if he could not believe he was being spared. Then slowly he lifted his head and looked around, with the wild eyes of a trapped animal suddenly finding its cage open. Lorenzo spoke a single word, "Leave," and Derek left. He scrambled to his feet with a speed no one thought he still had and ran as if demons were chasing him, ran past the men in black suits, who opened a path for him with looks of contempt, ran for the emergency exit someone had already opened, did not look back, did not slow down, only ran. His shape vanished through the door, and that was the last time Lily ever saw Derek Sullivan. The first floor of Saks Fifth Avenue sank into silence. No one dared move, no one dared speak. As if they had just witnessed an ancient and terrifying ritual they would never be allowed to name. Lorenzo turned to Lily, and all the cold cruelty melted from him like snow in sunlight. He stepped to her and wrapped his arms gently around her, careful not to touch her injured ribs, and whispered that it was over, il mio cuore, that Derek would never touch her again. Never. Lily rested her head against his chest and listened to the steady, powerful beat of his heart beneath his shirt, and she cried. But these were not tears of pain or fear. They were tears of release, of 4 years of weight finally falling away, of a dark chapter in her life finally closing. Lorenzo kissed the top of her head and gently guided her toward the private elevator, his men automatically stepping aside to form a passage for them, Marco following behind with a phone still to his ear finishing the last of the orders. And as they stepped into the elevator, Lily turned and looked back one last time at the floor, her blood still on the marble, broken crystal still glittering under the Christmas lights. But Derek was gone, and with him the ghost of the past. The elevator doors closed, and Lily Carter Marchetti left Saks Fifth Avenue in the arms of the man who loved her more than his own life, and a new chapter of her life began. The motorcade brought them back to the penthouse in silence. Lily curled into Lorenzo's arms the entire way, her head resting against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart like a lullaby, and Dr. Sarah Chen was already there when they arrived. A 40-year-old woman with short black hair, and the calm eyes of someone accustomed to handling emergencies for the Marchetti family. She examined Lily's injuries, stitched the cut on her elbow with 12 neat stitches, wrapped her bruised ribs, prescribed pain medication, and told her to rest, while Lorenzo stood beside her the entire time, never taking his eyes off Lily for a single second, his face taut with tension every time she flinched in pain. And after Dr. Chen left, Lorenzo carried Lily into the bedroom and laid her on the bed as if she were a fragile porcelain figure that might shatter if he were not careful. He lay down beside her, pulled her into his arms, and they stayed that way in silence for a long while. listening only to the winter wind against the windows and each other's breathing. And then Lily spoke and said he deserved to know everything, not just the fragments she had told him through nightmares, but the whole story from beginning to end. And Lorenzo said nothing, only held her tighter, and she began to tell him about her happy childhood with her parents in a small town outside Boston, about the little house with a flower garden, about evenings when the family sat around the table laughing together, then about the car accident when she was 16, the truck that lost control and hit her parents' car on the highway and killed them instantly, leaving her an orphan overnight, about her aunt, her mother's sister, who took her in not out of love but for the welfare money, about 6 years living like a servant in her aunt's house, cooking, cleaning, washing, while her cousins were treated like royalty, about the scolding and slaps when she displeased her aunt, and the loneliness and worthlessness that sank into her bones from that time. Then about Derek, how she met him in a cafe when she was 22 and had just become old enough to receive her inheritance, how he was handsome and charming and spoke the sweet words she had longed to hear after 6 years of being treated like nothing, how he told her she was beautiful, that she deserved love, that he would take care of her forever, and how she, naive and desperate for affection, believed him, moved in with him after 3 months, signed papers he gave her without reading because she trusted him to manage her finances, not knowing he had transferred all her inheritance into his own account, not knowing she had signed away all rights. And when she discovered it, it was too late, and that was the first time he hit her. And then came 3 years of hell. The beatings, the night he threw her into the street, the loss of her baby. But she had never told Lorenzo about the morning after, the morning she woke up in the hospital after someone found her unconscious in a subway restroom bleeding, the morning the doctors told her she had lost the baby and might never be able to have children again. The morning life felt meaningless, how she was discharged 2 days later with no one to meet her and nowhere to go, how she wandered New York like a ghost until the 3rd morning, when she stood on the sidewalk watching cars rush past and thought one step would end everything, how she lifted her foot ready to step when a hand grabbed her coat and pulled her back. A homeless man, the only person who noticed her, saved her life, called an ambulance, and she was taken back to the hospital, this time to the psychiatric ward, where she lay for 3 weeks without speaking or eating or wanting to live. And then Lorenzo appeared. He had come to visit an injured associate, took the wrong elevator, walked into the psychiatric unit and saw her through the glass, sitting by the window, staring out with empty eyes, thin and pale like a ghost, and he did not know why, but he could not stop looking at her. He came back the next day and the next and every day after that. At first she did not speak to him or even look at him, but he kept coming, sitting beside her for hours, sometimes reading, sometimes just being there, never asking anything, never forcing her to speak, just a warm, patient presence she had never known. And a month later she spoke her first words to him and asked why he kept coming back. And Lorenzo, the feared, ruthless Mafia boss, answered that he did not know, only that he could not come, that every day he did not see her felt like something was missing, and that was the beginning. A year later they married, and now 2 years after the wedding, lying in his arms overlooking Manhattan, Lily finally finished her story, and Lorenzo was silent for a long time, then held her tighter and whispered that he was grateful to that homeless man for pulling her back. He told her gently that he had found him weeks ago, given him a warm home and a pension for life, ensuring he would never know cold or hunger again, because without him, Lorenzo would never have met her, and his life would always have been missing half its soul. Lily cried, and Lorenzo kissed away her tears, and they lay there in the dark, 2 broken souls who had found each other and healed each other. Christmas Eve arrived 3 days after the events at Saks Fifth Avenue, and the penthouse atop the tallest building in Manhattan was dressed in splendor with a Christmas tree nearly 10 feet tall, standing in the center of the living room, golden lights wrapped around the columns, and hundreds of scented candles filling the air with warm notes of cinnamon and vanilla, snow drifting softly outside the windows, white flakes spinning in the city lights like a quiet dance. And this was not a grand party with hundreds of guests as other Mafia families liked to host because Lorenzo despised display and distrusted crowds. Instead, it was an intimate dinner for only those closest to him, the people he considered his true family. Marco Benedetti sat at the head of the table to Lorenzo's left, the salt and pepper-haired man who had followed him for 15 years and been the father he never had. Nico and Dante sat together, still young but already proven in loyalty through blood and sweat. Father Antonio, the 65-year-old priest from the church the Marchetti family had supported for 3 generations, sat across from Lily with a gentle smile and clear eyes. The man who had married Lorenzo and Lily 2 years earlier in a secret ceremony with only those in this room present, and the dinner passed in laughter and light stories. Marco telling tales of Lorenzo's childhood mischief that made the most feared mafia boss in New York blush like a boy caught stealing cookies. Nico and Dante arguing over which team would win this year until they almost came to blows before Lily stopped them with a plate of her homemade apple pie. Father Antonio blessing the meal and speaking of the true meaning of Christmas, of love and forgiveness and new beginnings. And when dessert was served, Lorenzo stood and raised a glass of red wine, and the room fell quiet. All eyes on him as he looked around at the faces of those who had stood by him through every storm, and then his gaze settled on Lily, and he spoke in a voice low and warm and filled with a feeling he rarely showed, saying he was not good with words, and everyone here knew that he was better at giving orders than speaking of love, better at making threats than expressing feeling. But tonight on this Christmas night, he wanted to speak about the woman who had changed his life. He looked at Lily and his dark eyes softened beyond measure, and he said that before he met her he only existed, waking each morning, doing what needed to be done, going to sleep each night without ever truly living. He had power and money and the fear of an entire city, but he had no one to come home to and no one who made him want to be better. And then she appeared, a thin, pale girl sitting by a hospital window staring at the world with eyes that had given up hope. And somehow she made his frozen heart beat again. He lifted his glass to Lily, and his voice trembled slightly as he said he did not deserve her. He knew that. He was a criminal with blood on his hands. Yet she chose to love him and to stay with him, and every day he tried to become a man worthy of that love. And then he smiled, a smile that lit up his usually cold face, and he said, "And tonight I have news to share." He looked at Lily and then at her belly and said, "Dr. Chen confirmed it this morning. Lily is pregnant." And for a moment the room was utterly silent. Then the cheers burst out. Marco leapt up and embraced both Lorenzo and Lily with tears on the cheeks of the man as hard as stone, like a child receiving his dream Christmas gift. Nico and Dante whooped and clapped each other on the back. Father Antonio crossed himself and whispered thanks to God. Lily sat there with trembling hands on her belly and tears streaming down her face as she looked at Lorenzo with disbelief and boundless joy. The doctors had said she might never be able to have children again after what Derek had done, but a miracle had happened and a small life was growing inside her, living proof of her love with Lorenzo and a new hope for a future she once believed she did not deserve. And Lorenzo stepped to her and knelt and placed his hand on her belly and whispered, "Thank you for giving me everything." And in that snowy Christmas night among those they loved, Lily finally believed she deserved happiness. 3 months passed like a dream, winter giving way to spring as the snow melted into small streams along the sidewalks of Manhattan, and Lily's belly had begun to curve gently beneath her clothes, and she stood before the 4-story building in Brooklyn with her heart beating fast with excitement and emotion, the polished brass plaque on the front door engraved with the words, "Rising Phoenix Foundation," and beneath it the image of a phoenix rising from flames. This was the dream she had carried for 2 years since the day she realized she wanted to turn her pain into something meaningful. Lorenzo had bought the building for her on Christmas night and wrapped it in a small box containing the keys and ownership papers. He had hired the best architects and contractors to transform it exactly as she envisioned into a refuge for abused and abandoned women. With 20 private bedrooms, each with its own bathroom and essentials, a shared living area with a warm kitchen and sitting room, a vocational training center offering computer skills, cooking and sewing, a therapy room staffed with professionals, and a daycare so mothers could study and work while their children were cared for, all of it free. And today was the official opening, with reporters from major newspapers waiting, cameras flashing in the spring sun, city officials invited to cut the ribbon, and most importantly, the first women had arrived, the first residents of Rising Phoenix Foundation. And Lily stepped to the podium with one hand resting lightly on her 4-month pregnant belly and looked out at the crowd and began to speak, saying that 4 years ago she had been one of the women this foundation was created to help, that she had been beaten and robbed of everything and thrown into the street with only $5 in her pocket, that she had lost her child to hunger and cold, that she had stood on a sidewalk and thought death was the only escape. And the crowd fell silent as all eyes turned to her, and she continued, her voice trembling but steady, saying she had gone through it all alone with no help and nowhere to go, and no one to tell her she would survive. But the women who walked through these doors would not be alone. They would have a home and support and a chance to rebuild their lives, because Rising Phoenix Foundation existed on her belief that every woman deserves a second chance and deserves to rise from the ashes like a phoenix. And she ended by saying they no longer had to fight alone, because she would be here, and she would fight beside them. And the applause rose like thunder, as Lily looked back to where Lorenzo stood in the shade, not seeking attention, only wanting to support her. Their eyes met, and he gave a small nod, and his dark eyes shone with pride. And afterward Lily met Maria, the first resident. a 32-year-old woman with 2 small children clinging to her legs and bruises still visible around her eyes, whose husband had fled after draining their joint account and leaving her with debt and nowhere to go. And Lily took Maria's hand and looked into her eyes and said she understood that feeling and promised she would get through it and that she would be here every step of the way. And Maria cried and hugged Lily, and in that moment Lily knew all her suffering had finally found meaning, that she had turned her wounds into strength and her pain into hope for others. And Lorenzo watched from a few steps away as his wife held a stranger with pure compassion and love, while Marco whispered that she was extraordinary. And Lorenzo nodded without taking his eyes off Lily and said she was his phoenix, risen from ashes and now helping others do the same. 6 months after the opening of Rising Phoenix Foundation, when Lily's belly was full and round with the child she was about to bring into the world, she received an email from an unfamiliar address and almost deleted it without reading until the subject line made her stop, because it said from Derek Sullivan. Her heart tightened for a moment, but it was no longer fear. She opened the email and read that he knew he had no right to contact her and did not deserve for her to read his words, but he wanted her to know he had seen the news about her foundation online and that he was proud of her for turning the worst things he had done into something beautiful. He wrote that he was in Mexico working as a waiter in a small restaurant living day to day on a modest wage, and that he was in therapy trying to understand why he had become the monster who hurt her, that he was not asking for forgiveness because he knew he did not deserve it, and that he only wanted her to know she deserved every good thing coming to her and that he hoped she was happy. Lily finished reading and sat quietly for a long time, waiting to feel something, anger or pain or triumph or anything at all. But nothing came, and she felt only emptiness when she thought of him, as if he were a stranger she had once known in another life. Lorenzo came in and asked if something was wrong, and she handed him the phone to read. His face did not change, and he only asked how she felt, and she said she felt free, and that the chapter was completely closed, and that he no longer had any power over her, not even the power to make her angry. Then she deleted the email without replying and deleted the address and erased every trace of Derek Sullivan from her life. Lorenzo held her and whispered that he was proud of her for her strength and for her ability to let go and move forward, and they never spoke of Derek again. A year later, on an autumn afternoon, when yellow leaves were falling on the streets of Manhattan, Lily stood by the penthouse window holding her 1-year-old daughter, Hope Marchetti, the name they chose because that was what she represented. Hope for the future, hope for new beginnings, hope for love that could heal every wound. The baby had black hair like her father, and green eyes like her mother, a perfect blend of them both, and she slept peacefully in Lily's arms with tiny fingers curled into her mother's blouse. Lily looked out over New York, the city where she had once nearly died of hunger and cold, and which was now her home, the place where she had risen from the ashes. Rising Phoenix Foundation had helped more than 200 women in the past year, and they were planning new centers in Chicago and Los Angeles. The life she once believed she did not deserve was now warm and real in her hands like the breath of her child. The private elevator opened, and familiar footsteps crossed the marble floor. And Lorenzo came in still in his Armani suit after a long day, but his face lit up when he saw his 2 girls. He kissed Hope's sleeping forehead, then Lily's lips, and asked how her day had been. And she smiled and said, "Perfect, everything is perfect." Lorenzo took a small red velvet box from his pocket and gave it to her, and when she opened it, her breath caught, because inside was a delicate rose gold necklace, with a phoenix pendant rising from flames, its wings set with tiny rubies, glowing like embers. Lorenzo fastened it around her neck and told her she was his phoenix who had risen from ashes, stronger, brighter, and more beautiful than anything he had imagined, and that he loved her, and would love her always until his last breath and beyond. Lily cried tears of happiness and told him she loved him too and loved the life they had built and this little family more than anything in the world. They stood there by the window, the 3 of them watching, the city lights come on as dusk fell, while below millions lived their own lives of joy and sorrow, victory and loss. And at the top of the tallest building, a woman who once wanted to die held her daughter and stood beside a man who loved her. More than his own life, Derek had tried to destroy her and take everything and leave her to fade on the streets, but she survived and rose and found true love and became the woman she never dared dream she could be. And now she was helping others do the same. Lily's story is a living testament to a simple and profound truth, that no matter how deeply life pushes you into darkness, no matter how much you lose and how hopeless it seems, you can still rise and find light and turn pain into strength, to help others, and it is never too late to begin again. Never. Too late to believe in love and hope. And if you are struggling, if you feel alone and desperate, remember you are not alone. Seek help. Let others love you. And most of all, believe in yourself because you are stronger than you think, and you deserve happiness, and you deserve love. And one day you too will rise from the ashes like a radiant phoenix. Thank you for walking with Lily and Lorenzo to these final lines. And if this story touched your heart, if it made you smile or cry or reflect on your own life, please subscribe to our channel, like and share this video so more people can hear stories like this each day, and tell us how you felt in the comments below. We would love to hear your honest thoughts, and every comment and share helps us continue to bring meaningful stories to you. We wish you health, peace, joy, and love every day, and remember, no matter how hard life becomes, you can always rise, just like the phoenix in this story. Goodbye, and we hope to see you again in the next video with more moving and inspiring stories.